July 1999. Y2K paranoia is sweeping through the country. The Sopranos is captivating audiences, and the Tour de France is underway with the new millennium on the horizon. A 27-year-old American named Lance Armstrong, a man who 3 years earlier had been diagnosed with advanced testicular cancer that had spread to his lungs and brain and given less than a 50% chance of survival, is dominating the race. He wins the prologue. He attacks on the mountains. He dominates the time trials. When the peloton rolls into Paris, Armstrong stands on the podium, a cancer survivor who had beaten death and conquered the hardest race on earth. The story was pure Hollywood. Over the next 7 years, he didn't just win the Tour de France. He won it 7 times in a row. He became a global icon. The Livestrong bracelet became a worldwide symbol of hope. Millions drew inspiration from his comeback. But beneath the yellow jerseys, the inspirational speeches, and the multi-million-dollar empire was one of the most sophisticated doping operations in sports history. Today we follow the lies from miracle survivor to disgraced champion. Welcome to Follow the Lies. I'm Kevin Barrows. I'm a former FBI special agent, private investigator, and co-host of the Smithsonian Channel docuseries Sports Detectives. Sports fraud cases have always grabbed my attention. Being a security consultant for a professional sports league and assisting professional athletes has given me a unique perspective on the incredible commitment it takes to become the best of the best. Seeing what these athletes go through day in and day out just to compete on a level playing field is off the charts. That's why sports fraud, especially cases involving cheating, are particularly disturbing. The Lance Armstrong story is one of the most troubling because it wasn't just one athlete cheating. It was a systemic, institutionalized program that corrupted an entire sport, while millions of fans and cancer patients believed in the fairy tale. I've investigated many fraud cases driven by greed and power. But this one wasn't just about winning races. It was about taking advantage of people's deepest hopes when they were at their most vulnerable. If you're enjoying these episodes, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit subscribe, leave a rating and review, and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. And if you want a guide to help you spot lies in business, investing, or everyday conversations, I created a free guide called 7 Proven Strategies to Spot Lies and Uncover the Truth in Any Interview. You can download it right now at followtheliespodcast.com. Let's go back to July 1999 and the start of one of the greatest deceptions in sports history. After battling advanced testicular cancer that had spread to his lungs and brain, Lance Armstrong returned to cycling in 1998 with a new team, U.S. Postal Service. What most people didn't know was that behind the scenes, the team was building a professionalized and ruthless doping program. It operated with military precision. There were rules, schedules, enforcement mechanisms, and a clear hierarchy. No one was forced at gunpoint, but the pressure was intense. Conform or be replaced. The drug of choice was erythropoietin, known as EPO, which dramatically increased red blood cell production and oxygen delivery to the muscles. They also used patient-dedicated blood transfusions, testosterone, human growth hormone, steroids, and masking agents to hide the doping from testers. They didn't just use performance-enhancing drugs, they perfected the art of avoiding detection. Riders microdosed EPO to stay just under the testing thresholds. They used saline infusions to dilute their blood values right before testers arrived. They timed their doping cycles around race schedules and had staff on motorcycles, known as motos, warning riders when testers were approaching hotels or race starts. The team even had a network of doctors who helped design individualized doping programs for each rider. What made it especially effective was how seamlessly it blended into the culture of the sport. Many riders later said the environment made doping feel almost normal, just another piece of equipment, another tool of the trade. The team even developed their own language and signals so outsiders would never catch on. The lies were layered and deliberate. The program required total participation. Teammates who questioned the doping were allegedly intimidated, marginalized, or pushed out. Those who stayed were expected to dope. Former teammates later testified that Armstrong was ruthless in protecting the secret. He repeatedly pressured riders to use performance-enhancing drugs and threatened those who considered coming forward. Armstrong sat at the center of it all, both the biggest beneficiary and one of its chief enforcers. The deception wasn't limited to the riders. It involved team management, doctors, and support staff. The entire operation was designed to win at all costs while maintaining a public image of clean, hard-working athletes who had overcome incredible odds. Armstrong used that story masterfully, both to inspire fans and to shield the program from scrutiny. For years, it worked brilliantly. Armstrong and the U.S. Postal dominated the Tour de France. The money flowed, the sponsors were happy, the public believed in the hero. The lie was so complete that even many inside the sport suspected something was wrong but couldn't prove it or didn't want to. As far back as 2001, British sports writer David Walsh began publishing serious allegations that Armstrong was working with the notorious Italian doctor Michele Ferrari, who was later convicted for providing performance-enhancing drugs to athletes. Walsh continued investigating for years, but his claims were largely dismissed or attacked at the time. Then, in 2010, the investigation gained real momentum. FDA agent Jeff Nowitzki, famous for previously investigating Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, started looking into the cycling team Rock Racing after a cache of performance-enhancing drugs was discovered in an apartment linked to rider Kyle Leogrand. That case soon pivoted towards Armstrong. Later that same year, Floyd Landis, Armstrong's former teammate and the 2006 Tour de France winner, sent a detailed email to cycling officials admitting to doping and accusing Armstrong and the entire U.S. Postal team of running an organized doping program for years. That email was the spark that lit the fuse. What followed was one of the most thorough anti-doping investigations ever conducted. Agents and investigators with the FDA, FBI, and U.S. Postal Service spent years piecing together testimony, lab results, financial trails, and shipping records that showed how deeply entrenched the program had become. The U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, USADA, also launched a full-scale investigation. What they uncovered was almost incomprehensible. Not the work of one rogue athlete, but a professionally run, well-oiled doping machine that operated for nearly a decade with the full knowledge and participation of team management. USADA interviewed dozens of former teammates, doctors, coaches, and support staff. 11 of Armstrong's former U.S. Postal teammates eventually testified under oath, providing consistent, detailed accounts of how the program worked. Their testimony painted a picture of a team that didn't just tolerate doping, it demanded it as a condition of employment. The culture was clear. You're in or you're out. One of the most damaging testimonies came from Tyler Hamilton, Armstrong's longtime teammate and a former Olympic gold medalist. Hamilton described the doping scheme and testified that Armstrong once told the team, "Everybody's doing it. You're an idiot if you don't." Hamilton later said that the pressure to dope was intense. Other riders painted similar pictures. The testimony wasn't just one or two disgruntled ex-teammates. It was a chorus of voices that had been silent for years. Another former teammate, Frankie Andrew, revealed that as early as 1996, before Armstrong's cancer diagnosis, Armstrong admitted in a hospital room to doctors that he had used performance-enhancing drugs. This testimony directly contradicted Armstrong's long-standing claim that he never doped before his cancer battle. The evidence was overwhelming. Blood tests from multiple years showed abnormal values consistent with EPO use and blood transfusions. Financial records revealed large payments to doctors known for doping athletes. Internal emails and communication showed coordinated efforts to evade testers. The investigation also revealed how aggressively the program was protected. Armstrong himself was described as one of the most dominant figures in keeping the scheme quiet. Former teammates testified that he pressured them to dope and threatened those who considered coming forward. For years, it kept the truth buried. A federal grand jury investigation was also underway in Los Angeles. In 2010 and 2011, several of Armstrong's former teammates testified. Then, in February 2012, the U.S. Attorney's Office quietly dropped the criminal case. They issued a short statement commending the efforts of the investigative agencies, but declined to explain why they chose not to prosecute Armstrong. Now let's go inside the investigation, where I go behind the scenes and explain how these cases are made, or in this case, not made. There are many factors prosecutors weigh before bringing federal charges. As a former agent, I was sometimes smack in the middle of these discussions. The first and most important question is always whether the evidence supports a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. Cheating in a bike race doesn't automatically equal a provable federal crime. But the decision doesn't stop there. Practical considerations also come into play, including the lack of jury appeal and negative public perception of prosecuting a heroic cancer survivor who had built a massive charity like Livestrong. I also believe the failed prosecutions of Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens played a role in their thinking. In October 2012, USADA released a scathing 202-page report. It stripped Armstrong of all 7 Tour de France titles, banned him for life from the sport, and called the U.S. Postal Team's doping program the most sophisticated, professionalized, and successful doping program the sport had ever seen. The report detailed how the team used a combination of EPO, blood transfusions, testosterone, and other substances, along with advanced methods to avoid detection. It described a culture where riders who stepped out of line were threatened or pushed aside. The USADA CEO said in a public statement, "The evidence showed a conspiracy of silence that went far beyond one individual." He emphasized that the program succeeded not just because of the drugs, but because of the culture that kept riders quiet. The report was devastating. Sponsors began dropping Armstrong, the Livestrong Foundation distanced itself. The man who had once been celebrated as a cancer hero was now facing one of the biggest falls from grace in modern sports history. The investigation didn't stop there. USADA's report triggered further scrutiny from the International Cycling Union and other anti-doping bodies. Armstrong's legacy, once untouchable, was systematically dismantled. Titles were stripped, records were erased, and the fairy tale that inspired millions was exposed as one of the most elaborate deceptions in sports history. The ripple effects were immediate. The International Cycling Union faced its own questions about how such a large-scale program had gone undetected for so long. Armstrong's name was erased from the record books, and the sport was forced to confront how deeply the rot had spread. In January 2013, after more than a decade of fierce, aggressive denials, including lawsuits against journalists, former teammates, and accusers, Lance Armstrong finally sat down with Oprah Winfrey for a 2.5-hour interview that millions around the world watched with a mix of anticipation and disbelief. For 90 minutes, Armstrong admitted what many had long suspected but could never fully prove. Yes, he had doped. Yes, the entire U.S. Postal Service team had run a doping program. Yes, it had gone on for years. He confessed to using EPO, blood transfusions, testosterone, steroids, and other performance-enhancing substances. He admitted to bullying teammates who resisted or threatened to speak out. He acknowledged lying repeatedly to the public, to cancer patients, to fans, to anti-doping authorities, and even to his own foundation for over a decade. Watching that interview, you could see the internal conflict. At times, Armstrong still seemed to minimize certain things or shift blame, but the admissions were enough to shatter the last remnants of his defense. For years, Armstrong had aggressively attacked anyone who questioned him. He sued former teammates, called accusers liars, used his enormous influence to destroy careers and reputations. He even pressured the International Cycling Union to cover up positive tests. The level of control and influence he exerted over the sport was incredible. Even after the USADA report dropped in 2012 with overwhelming evidence, Armstrong continued fighting the narrative in public. In one memorable moment before the eventual confession, he posted on Twitter defiantly denying the charges. For over a decade, he had looked cancer patients, fans, and the media in the eye and lied with absolute conviction. The psychological toll of maintaining that level of deception for so long, while simultaneously profiting from the inspirational story he had created, remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire saga. As I've seen repeatedly in my career, the longer someone lives inside a lie, the more it becomes their reality. The fallout of the Oprah Winfrey interview was swift and brutal. Major sponsors, Nike, Oakley, Trek, Anheuser-Busch, and others, dropped him almost immediately, costing him tens of millions in future earnings. Livestrong, the foundation he had built into a global brand that had raised hundreds of millions for cancer research, publicly distanced itself. The man who had once been celebrated as a symbol of hope and human resilience became one of the most reviled figures in modern sports history almost overnight. In the following months and years, the full scope of the damage became clearer. Lawsuits piled up. Former teammates wrote books. Documentaries revisited the era with new evidence. The cycling world spent years trying to rebuild credibility, while fans grappled with the question, how many of the performances they had cheered for were actually real. On the deception spectrum, this case sits in the middle. It wasn't the impulsive act of one athlete trying to gain a small edge. It was a systemic, long-term, institutionalized fraud that involved an entire team, sophisticated evasion techniques, extraordinary efforts to keep it quiet, coordinated medical support, and a culture of silence and fear that lasted for years. The deception was so complete that it fooled the public, sponsors, anti-doping agencies, and even many inside the sport for more than a decade, but within a niche sport which did not affect the public at large. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part is who the real victims were. It wasn't just the clean riders who lost podium places, sponsorships, and careers because they refused to dope. The most serious damage was done to the millions of cancer patients and their families who believed in the Armstrong fairy tale. They bought the yellow Livestrong bracelets and were inspired by his story. They donated money to his foundation, thinking they were supporting a hero who had beaten cancer and come back stronger. When the truth came out, that hope was shattered for many. The betrayal went well beyond sports. It struck at the heart of people who needed to believe in miracles. One woman who had worn the Livestrong bracelet through chemotherapy said she felt like she had been lied to during the hardest time of her life. Armstrong didn't just cheat at cycling. He built an empire on a lie. And millions of people invested their hope, money, admiration, and emotional energy into that lie. In the years since, Armstrong has attempted various comebacks, podcasts, interviews, and even a return to competitive cycling in a lesser event. But the damage to his legacy has been permanent. He lost his fortune, his reputation, and the adoration of the public. The Lance Armstrong scandal remains one of the most instructive cases of large-scale deception in modern sports. It shows how charisma, narrative control, and institutional protection can allow a lie to grow to enormous proportions. It also demonstrates how powerful the human desire to believe in heroes can be, and how devastating the betrayal feels when that belief is shattered. The core lesson is timeless. When winning becomes more important than truth, when the rewards are enormous and the oversight is weak, some people will always find a way to cheat, and they will build an entire system to protect that cheat. It also highlights something I've seen in many investigations. The longer a lie is protected by power and popularity, the more destructive it becomes when it finally collapses. Each episode, I'll share a lie detector tip, a practical, field-tested piece of advice drawn from real investigations to help you spot deception or protect yourself from situations where it becomes far more likely. Today's lie detector tip is about performance enhancement and the danger of rationalization. When the stakes are high and the rewards are enormous, it becomes very easy to convince yourself that everyone's doing it, or I have no choice if I want to compete. Armstrong and his team used that exact rationalization for years. My advice is simple. When you find yourself justifying behavior you know deep down is wrong, whether in sports, business, or life, stop and ask yourself if you would be comfortable if everyone knew what you were doing. If the answer is no, you're already on dangerous ground. I've sat across from witnesses who use the exact same rationalization. It's one of the most common bridges people cross from integrity to deception. The moment you start bargaining with your own conscience, that's your warning sign. Stop, step back, and ask the hard question before the justification becomes habit. Real success is never built on shortcuts that require you to lie to yourself or others. From cancer hero to strip champion, the Lance Armstrong story remains one of the most dramatic falls from grace in modern sports history. It shows how deception can scale when winning becomes more important than integrity. If you've encountered a sports story, business deal, or personal narrative that seemed inspirational on the surface but felt off underneath, send it to Kevin at followtheliespodcast.com. Those are exactly the kind of cases I love to explore. If you want a practical tool to help you spot lies and protect yourself from deception, grab my free guide, 7 Proven Strategies to Spot Lies and Uncover the Truth in Any Interview. It's available right now at followtheliespodcast.com. While you're there, I'd love for you to join me on Substack at followthelies.substack.com. That's where I share additional notes, deeper dives into those cases, and exclusive lie detector tips you won't hear in the episodes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please hit subscribe, leave a rating or review, and I'd really appreciate it if you text the link to a friend or coworker who might find it useful. Those small shares help independent shows like this one grow more than anything else. Thank you for listening. Until next time, follow the lies.